Zektar pressed his long, pale fingers against the cold metal wall of his ship and felt the vibrations that meant death was coming. The engine had stopped 3 days ago with a sound like breaking glass, and now the lights were getting dimmer. Soon the air would stop moving, and then he would die alone in the endless dark between stars. He was a Velnari, and his people were the smartest in the galaxy. Everyone knew this. Their ships could travel faster than any other race. Their computers could solve problems that took other species years to figure out. Their cities floated in space like jewels, perfect and beautiful. But none of that mattered now because Zektar was going to die in a broken ship, millions of miles from home. The exploration mission had started well. Zektar was young for such an important job, but he was brilliant even by Velnari standards. His task was simple: fly to the edge of known space, scan for new planets, and return with data. The Velnari Council wanted to find new worlds before the primitive species could stumble onto them and ruin them with their crude technology. Everything went wrong near a small yellow star. The ship's computer had detected something strange in the area, an energy reading that didn't match anything in their databases. Zektar had moved closer to investigate, following proper procedures. But when he tried to scan the anomaly, something had gone very wrong. A wave of some kind of radiation hit his ship, and the main engine simply died. Now he drifted in space like a piece of garbage. The backup power was failing, and his distress beacon was too weak to reach Velnari space. He had tried to fix the engine himself, but the damage was too severe. Important parts had melted together, and others had simply vanished, turned to dust by whatever had hit him. Zektar sat at his control panel and started recording what he thought would be his final message. His voice was calm, as a proper Velnari should be, but inside he felt scared and alone. "This is Science Officer Zektar of the exploration vessel Morning Light," he said to the recording device. "I have been stranded for 73 hours. All repair attempts have failed. The engine is completely destroyed and life support will fail within 2 days. He paused and looked out the small window at the stars. They looked the same as they always had, cold and distant. "I want the Council to know that I followed all procedures. The energy anomaly was unlike anything in our databases. I recommend that future missions avoid this sector until we can understand what happened here." The recording continued for several minutes as Zektar described his scientific findings from the mission. Even facing death, he was a good Velnari scientist, making sure his data would be useful to others. When he finished, he sat back in his chair and closed his eyes. The Velnari believed that death was simply the end of function, like a machine that stopped working. There was no great mystery to it, no spiritual meaning. Zektar had always found this belief comforting, but now it just made him feel empty. His life had been spent learning and discovering, and soon all of that would be gone. Hours passed slowly. The ship grew colder as the heating system used up more of the precious remaining power. Zektar wrapped himself in the emergency thermal blankets and tried to sleep, but every small sound made him wake up. Was that the air recycler finally giving up? Was the hull starting to crack from the cold? On the second day, he started talking to himself just to hear a voice. He told stories about his childhood on the great space station where he had grown up. He recited scientific formulas and poetry that he had learned in school. He even sang old songs, though the Velnari were not known for their music. "Someone should find this ship eventually," he said to the empty air. "Maybe in 100 years, maybe 1,000. They will learn from my failure." But he knew the truth. Space was vast and his ship was small. The chances of anyone finding him were almost zero. The primitive species that lived in this part of the galaxy didn't have the technology to detect his ship, and other Velnari would have no reason to come here. On the third day, the air started to taste stale. The recycling system was failing just as he had predicted. Zektar made one final recording. "The end is very close now," he said. "I want to say that I was proud to serve the Velnari people. We are the greatest civilization in the galaxy, and we will continue to explore and learn long after I am gone. I hope that my death will teach others to be more careful when facing the unknown." He turned off the recorder and sat in the growing darkness. The main lights had failed hours ago, leaving only the small emergency panels glowing red. Soon even those would die, and he would be alone in complete blackness. That was when he saw the light. At first he thought it was his imagination, a small point of brightness moving against the stars, growing slowly larger. But as he watched, he realized it was real. Something was coming toward his ship. Zektar felt a moment of hope, then dismissed it. The light was probably just a piece of space debris reflecting starlight. But as minutes passed, the light continued to grow and change direction. It was definitely a ship of some kind. He tried to power up his communication system, but there wasn't enough energy left. All he could do was watch as the strange vessel approached. It was crude-looking, much different from the sleek lines of Velnari ships. The hull looked like it was made of simple metal plates welded together. Primitive symbols were painted on the side in bright colors. As the ship drew closer, Zektar could see beings moving around inside through small windows. They didn't look like Velnari. They were shorter and stockier, with darker skin and strange body shapes. He had never seen this species before, but from the look of their technology, they were clearly one of the primitive races that the Velnari usually ignored. The strange ship stopped near his vessel and began flashing lights in what was obviously a signal. Zektar couldn't respond, but he watched in amazement as the beings inside seemed to understand that he was in trouble. What happened next would change everything he thought he knew about the galaxy. Jake Parker pushed his worn baseball cap back on his head and stared at the screen showing the strange readings. The New Horizon was 3 days into a routine supply run to the mining colonies when the sensors had picked up something unusual. "Lisa, take a look at this," Jake called to his engineer. "Ever seen energy patterns like these before?" Lisa Ford wiped her hands on a greasy rag and walked over from the engine compartment. She was a small woman with bright red hair tied back in a ponytail, but Jake knew she could fix anything that had gears, wires, or moving parts. She studied the display and whistled softly. "That's definitely artificial," she said. "Some kind of power source, but the signature is all wrong. Not like anything we use, or the colonies either." Tony Chen looked up from his medical supplies inventory. As the ship's medic, he usually stayed out of technical discussions, but he was curious about everything. "Could be pirates?" he suggested. "Maybe they're using stolen alien tech." Jake shook his head. "We're too far from the shipping lanes. And look at these readings. Whatever it is, it's not moving, just sitting there." The 3 humans had worked together for 5 years, running cargo to the outer colonies where life was hard and supplies were always needed. They weren't explorers or scientists, just working people trying to make an honest living in space. But Jake had learned to trust his instincts, and something about this situation felt important. "Could be someone in trouble," Jake said finally. "If that's a ship out there, they might need help." Lisa frowned. "Company policy says we don't investigate unknown contacts. Too dangerous. Company policy also says we don't let people die when we could help them," Jake replied. He was already changing course toward the energy source. "Besides, we're 3 days ahead of schedule. We can spare a few hours." The New Horizon was an old cargo freighter built for carrying supplies rather than exploring. Her hull was scratched and dented from years of hard use, and her systems were held together with spare parts and determination. But she was reliable, and Jake loved her like family. As they got closer to the source of the readings, their sensors began picking up more details. There was definitely a ship out there, but its design was completely unfamiliar. The energy signature was getting weaker by the hour. "Whoever they are, they're running out of power," Lisa observed. "Life support is probably failing." "Any response to our signals?" Jake asked. Tony shook his head from the communication station. "Nothing. Either they can't hear us or they don't understand our language." When the alien ship finally appeared on their visual display, all 3 humans stopped what they were doing and stared. It was beautiful in a way that made their own vessel look like a crude tool. Smooth curves instead of angular plates. Materials that seemed to glow with their own light, and proportions that were somehow perfect to the eye. "Now that's what I call engineering," Lisa whispered. "Look at those hull lines. Not a wasted angle anywhere." But Jake's attention was focused on the obvious signs of damage. Scorch marks along one side, a section of hull that looked melted and no lights anywhere except for a few dim emergency indicators. "Someone's in trouble," he said. "Lisa, get the docking tube ready. Tony, grab your medical kit. We're going aboard." "Jake, are you crazy?" Lisa protested. "We don't know anything about these people. They could be hostile. Their atmosphere could be poisonous to us. They could also be dying while we argue about it," Jake replied firmly. "Look at that ship. Does it look threatening to you? It looks like someone who got hit by something nasty and needs our help." Tony was already gathering his medical supplies. "I'm with the captain," he said. We can take precautions, but we can't just leave them to die. Lisa sighed and headed for the docking equipment. You two are going to get us killed someday, she muttered. But Jake knew she agreed with him. None of them could walk away from someone in need. Getting the docking tube attached to the alien ship was harder than expected. The hull materials didn't work the same way as human ships, and it took Lisa nearly an hour of creative problem-solving to make a seal that would hold air. But finally they were ready to go across. Jake led the way into the alien ship, followed by Tony and Lisa. The inside was even more impressive than the outside. Everything was smooth and curved, made from materials that seemed to glow softly. But many of the lights were dark, and the air felt cold and still. They found the alien in what was obviously the control room, slumped in a chair that was designed for his tall, thin body. He was unconscious but breathing, and his pale skin had a bluish tint that suggested he wasn't getting enough oxygen. He's alive, Tony said, running a scanner over the alien, but just barely. His life support is almost gone. Jake knelt down next to the alien's chair. The being was definitely intelligent, wearing what looked like a uniform covered with symbols and badges. His hands were long and delicate with 6 fingers instead of 5. His face was narrow and elegant, with large eyes that were closed now but probably saw more than human eyes could. Can we move him to our ship? Jake asked. Tony nodded. I think so. His body structure looks similar enough to ours, but I have no idea what kind of atmosphere he needs or what might poison him. Lisa was examining the alien ship's controls with fascination. Look at this technology, she said. It's incredible. These systems are at least 100 years ahead of anything we have. Can you figure out how to restore life support? Jake asked. Lisa studied the displays, most of which showed red warning symbols. Maybe. The basic principles look the same even if the technology is different. But Jake, some of these components are completely fried. It would take parts we don't have and time we might not have. The alien stirred slightly and opened his eyes. They were large and dark, and filled with confusion as he looked at the 3 humans standing over him. He tried to speak, but only weak sounds came out. Easy there, Tony said gently, using the same calm voice he used with injured colonists. We're here to help. You're safe now. The alien's eyes widened as he took in their appearance. Jake could see him studying their faces, their clothing, their equipment. Whatever he was thinking, it was clearly not what he had expected. Tony pulled out a small device that could analyze atmospheric conditions. The air in here is almost gone, he reported. We need to get him oxygen soon or we're going to lose him. Jake made his decision. Lisa, can you rig something to give his ship power from ours? Just enough for life support? I can try, Lisa said. But it's going to be tricky. Our power systems are completely different. Do it, Jake ordered. Tony, see if you can help him breathe. We're not letting anyone die on our watch. As his crew got to work, Jake knelt down next to the alien again. The being was watching him with those large, dark eyes, and Jake thought he could see intelligence there, and maybe gratitude. Don't worry, friend, Jake said softly. We're going to get you through this. Zektar watched in amazement as the primitive beings worked on his ship. They moved with purpose and confidence, even though they clearly didn't understand his technology. The female with red hair had somehow connected cables between her crude vessel and his sophisticated ship, and power was flowing again. It should have been impossible. The air was getting better, too. The male with the gentle hands had figured out how to increase the oxygen flow, without poisoning Zektar with gases that his body couldn't process. He had done this by watching Zektar's reactions carefully, and adjusting the mixture until the Velnari's skin color improved. These beings were human, Zektar realized. He had heard of them in the Velnari databases, listed as a primitive species that had barely learned to travel between stars. They were supposed to be violent and stupid, driven by emotions instead of logic, but the humans working to save his life seemed neither violent nor stupid. The one who appeared to be their leader was crouched next to Zektar's chair, speaking in a calm voice even though Zektar couldn't understand the words. The human's face showed concern and determination, expressions that Zektar recognized even across the barriers of different species. Jake, I think I can jury-rig his life support to run off our power, the red-haired human called out. She was deep inside an access panel, working with tools that looked crude but seemed to work well. But it's going to drain our batteries pretty fast. Do whatever you need to do, Lisa, the leader replied. We'll worry about our own power later. Zektar tried to sit up straighter. His strength was returning as the air improved, and he wanted to understand what was happening. The humans noticed his movement, and the medical one came over with a device that he pointed at Zektar. His vital signs are improving, Tony reported. Whatever we're doing, it's working. Jake nodded and pulled out a small computer device. He showed the screen to Zektar, and the Velnari saw a simple drawing of two stick figures standing next to each other. One was tall and thin like a Velnari, the other short and thick like a human. Jake pointed to himself and said, "Human," then pointed to Zektar with a questioning expression. Zektar understood. He pointed to himself and said Velnari as clearly as he could. Jake smiled and nodded, then began tapping on his device. Within minutes, he had created a simple translation program that could handle basic words and concepts. "Amazing," Zektar whispered in his own language, and was surprised when Jake's device repeated the word in English. "You help me?" Zektar managed to say in broken English using the translation program. "Why?" Jake looked surprised by the question. "Because you needed help," he said simply. The translator turned his words into Velnari concepts that Zektar could understand. This made no sense to Zektar. In Velnari society, help was given only when there was something to be gained in return. These humans didn't know who he was, what he could offer them, or even if his people were friendly. Yet they risked their own safety and resources to save him. Lisa emerged from the access panel, her face streaked with grease but smiling with satisfaction. "Got it," she announced. "Your life support is now running on our backup power. Should keep you alive for days if needed, but your ship?" Zektar asked through the translator. "You need power?" "We've got enough," Jake assured him. "Our main engines are fine, and we can recharge the batteries when we reach the next station." Zektar studied the humans more carefully. Their clothing was practical but worn, suggesting they were not wealthy. Their ship, which he could see through the docking tube, was clearly old and had been repaired many times. These were working beings, not rich explorers with resources to spare. "You lose money?" Zektar asked. "Helping me costs you." Tony laughed, a sound that the translator couldn't convert, but that Zektar somehow understood meant humor, not mockery. "Everything costs something," Tony said. "But letting someone die when you could help them costs more." This was a completely alien concept to Zektar. The Velnari calculated the value of every action, every resource used, every minute spent. They helped others only when the benefits exceeded the costs. But these humans seemed to operate on different principles entirely. Lisa was studying his ship's damaged systems with fascination. "This technology is incredible," she said to her companions. "Look at how they've integrated the power distribution. And these materials? I've never seen anything like them. Can you fix the damage?" Jake asked. Lisa shook her head. "Not completely. Some of these components are completely fried, and I don't have anything that could replace them, but maybe I can get his engines working well enough to limp to a station." Zektar was shocked. "You try to fix my ship? But you don't understand our technology." "I understand engines," Lisa replied confidently. "Velnari or human, they all work on the same basic principles. You need power, you need fuel, and you need something to push against. The details might be different, but the science is the same." Over the next several hours, Zektar watched Lisa work on his engines with growing amazement. She approached the alien technology without fear, studying each component carefully and figuring out its purpose through observation and logic. When she encountered something she didn't understand, she asked Zektar to explain it through the translator. But even more surprising was her willingness to share her own knowledge. When Zektar asked how she had managed to connect their power systems, Lisa explained her techniques in detail, teaching him human engineering principles that he had never considered. "We build things to be fixed," she explained. "Your technology is more advanced, but it's also more fragile. When something breaks, you need special parts and special tools. Our stuff might be crude, but you can repair it with basic materials and some creativity." Zektar found himself learning from these primitive beings. Their approach to engineering was completely different from the Velnari way, where his people designed perfect systems that worked flawlessly under ideal conditions. The humans built robust systems that could handle unexpected problems. Jake spent time teaching Zektar more English words and learning some Velnari in return. The human captain was curious about Zektar's mission and his people. asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than just politeness. "So you're an explorer?" Jake said. "That's a good job. There's always something new to discover out here." "Yes," Zektar agreed. "But my people, they think other species are not important. We explore to find resources, not to meet new friends." "That's too bad," Jake replied. "Some of my best friends are from different colonies, different backgrounds. You learn a lot when you talk to people who think differently than you do." Tony provided food and water that his instruments indicated would be safe for Velnari consumption. The taste was strange but not unpleasant, and Zektar realized he was hungry for the first time since his accident. As his strength returned, Zektar began to understand that he was witnessing something remarkable. These humans worked together perfectly, each one contributing their unique skills to solve problems. They made jokes and laughed together, but they also supported each other when the work got difficult. "Why do you do this job?" Zektar asked Jake. "Flying supplies to colonies?" Jake thought for a moment. "Because people need things," he said. "Out on the frontier, life is hard. If we don't bring them food and medicine and equipment, they suffer. It's not glamorous work, but it matters." "But you could make more money doing other things." "Probably," Jake admitted. "But money isn't everything. I like knowing that what I do makes a difference in people's lives." Zektar was quiet for a long time, thinking about what he had learned. Everything he had been taught about primitive species was wrong. These humans were not stupid or violent. They were resourceful, generous, and wise in ways that the Velnari had never considered. After 18 hours of continuous work, Lisa finally stepped back from Zektar's engine compartment and wiped the sweat from her forehead. Her hands were covered in a mixture of human grease and alien fluids that glowed faintly blue, and her red hair had escaped from its ponytail to hang in messy strands around her face. "Well, I've got good news and bad news," she announced to Jake and Tony, who were taking a break from monitoring Zektar's condition. The Velnari was much stronger now, able to stand and walk around his ship, though he still tired easily. "Give me the bad news first," Jake said. "The bad news is that his main engine is completely destroyed. Whatever hit him melted the core components into slag. I can't fix that with anything we have on board." Zektar's shoulders sagged. He had been hoping that these remarkable humans could perform another miracle, but apparently even their ingenuity had limits. "However," Lisa continued with a grin, "the good news is that I think I can get his secondary propulsion system working. It won't be fast and it won't be pretty, but it should get him to the nearest space station." "How?" Tony asked. Lisa led them to where she had been working. What Zektar saw made his eyes widen in disbelief. Lisa had somehow connected parts from the human ship to his vessel's damaged systems using cables. Tubes and components that looked like they had been assembled by someone who understood neither technology completely, but had a genius for making things work. "Anyway, I've bypassed the main power, coupling and rerouted everything through this relay system I built," Lisa explained, pointing to a box-shaped device that hummed quietly. "It's mostly made from parts of our spare environmental processor, but it should regulate the power flow to his secondary engines." "This should not work," Zektar said, studying the improvised connections. "The power frequencies are completely wrong and the safety protocols—" "Sometimes you have to ignore safety protocols to save lives," Lisa replied. "Besides, I've built in some buffer systems that should prevent any dangerous feedback loops." Jake was examining the work with admiration. "How long will it hold together?" "Long enough to get him somewhere safe, I hope," Lisa said. "But he'll need proper Velnari technicians to do a real repair job." "But this means you lose more parts from your ship," Zektar protested. "You give me your equipment. We've got spares for most of it," Jake assured him. "And we can get replacements at the next port. Don't worry about it." Zektar was learning that "don't worry about it" was a common human phrase, but one that his people would never understand. The Velnari worried about everything, calculated every cost, planned for every possibility. These humans seemed to face problems as they came, and trust that solutions would present themselves. The test run of the jury-rigged engines went better than anyone expected except Lisa, who had a quiet confidence in her work that impressed Zektar greatly. The secondary engines came online with a steady hum, and the navigation system showed that the ship was capable of controlled flight again. "Outstanding work, Lisa," Jake said. "How long do you think it will take him to reach a station?" Lisa consulted her calculations. Velnari Station 7 is the closest facility that should have the parts and expertise he needs. At the speed his secondary engines can manage, about 6 days. 6 days with jury-rigged systems, Tony said thoughtfully. A lot could go wrong in 6 days. That's why we're going to escort him, Jake announced. Both Lisa and Tony stared at their captain in surprise. Zektar felt something warm spread through his chest, an emotion he didn't recognize, but that felt good. Jake, that's going to put us way off our route, Lisa pointed out. The company isn't going to be happy about another delay. The company can invoice me for the extra fuel, Jake replied firmly. We're not leaving him to make that journey alone. What if something breaks down? What if pirates find him? Pirates would not attack a Velnari ship, Zektar said. My people are too powerful. Maybe, Jake said. But a damaged ship with jury-rigged systems looks like easy prey to some people. Besides, this way, if Lisa's repairs fail, we can fix them again. Tony was nodding agreement. Makes sense to me. We've invested too much work in keeping him alive to abandon him now. Zektar felt overwhelmed by their generosity. I cannot repay this kindness, he said. My people, we trade value for value. But you give freely with no promise of return. Sometimes the return comes in ways you don't expect, Jake said. Maybe someday we'll need help from the Velnari. Maybe, Zektar agreed. But privately he doubted it. The Velnari Council would never approve of helping primitive humans, no matter what those humans had done for one explorer. The journey to Velnari Station 7 took 8 days instead of 6, because Lisa's repairs needed adjustment twice along the way. Both times the humans worked patiently to fix the problems, treating each breakdown as an interesting puzzle rather than a frustrating setback. During the long hours of travel, Zektar spent time aboard the New Horizon, learning about human culture and sharing stories of his own people. The differences were striking. Where Velnari society was organized around logic and efficiency, human society seemed to run on emotion and personal connections. Don't you find it inefficient? Zektar asked Jake during one conversation, making decisions based on feelings instead of calculations. Sometimes, Jake admitted. But efficiency isn't everything. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't the most logical thing. Like rescuing me, Zektar observed. Exactly like rescuing you, Jake confirmed. Zektar learned that Jake had a family back on Earth, a wife and 2 children he hadn't seen in 6 months. Lisa supported her elderly parents with her earnings from the freight runs. Tony sent most of his pay to fund medical clinics on poor colonies. None of them were wealthy, but all of them seemed content with their lives. You could demand higher pay, Zektar pointed out. With your skills, other companies would hire you. Probably, Lisa agreed. But we like working together. Jake treats us fairly, and we do good work for people who need it. That's worth more than a bigger paycheck to most of us. This was another concept that Zektar struggled to understand. In Velnari society, individuals always sought to maximize their personal advantage. The idea of choosing loyalty and satisfaction over profit seemed almost alien to him. On the 6th day, they encountered a small problem that became a lesson for Zektar about human problem-solving. The jury-rigged power coupling began overheating, threatening to shut down the engines completely. Lisa studied the problem for several hours but couldn't find a solution using standard approaches. What if we reversed the polarity on this coupling? Tony suggested, pointing to a component he didn't fully understand. That shouldn't work, Lisa replied. The power flow would be all wrong. But what if it did work? Jake added. What's the worst that could happen? Lisa thought about it, then grinned. The worst that could happen is we'd have to rebuild the whole system. The best that could happen is we'd solve our overheating problem. Sounds like good odds to me, Jake said. They tried Tony's suggestion, and it worked perfectly. The overheating stopped and the engines ran more smoothly than before. Zektar was amazed that someone with no technical training had provided the key insight that solved their problem. How did you know that would work? Zektar asked Tony. I didn't, Tony replied honestly. But sometimes you have to try things that seem impossible. You never know what might work until you test it. That's very unscientific, Zektar observed. Maybe, Tony agreed with a smile. But science is about discovering new things, right? You can't discover anything new if you only try things that you already know will work. As Velnari Station 7 grew larger on their screens, Zektar felt sad about the approaching end of his journey with the humans. They had taught him more in 8 days than he had learned in years of formal education. But they had also created a problem for him that he didn't know how to solve. How could he explain to his people that everything they believed about primitive species was wrong? Velnari Station 7 appeared before them like a crystal flower blooming in space. Its elegant spires and curved surfaces made the human freighter look even more crude by comparison. But Zektar no longer saw the human ship as primitive. He saw it as functional, reliable, and operated by beings who understood that the true measure of technology was not how beautiful it looked, but how well it served those who needed it. The station's traffic control contacted them as they approached, speaking in the melodious Velnari language that now sounded strange to Zektar's ears after days of hearing English. "Unknown vessels. Identify yourselves and state your business," the controller said. Zektar took the communication device from Jake, who had been trying to respond in broken Velnari learned from their translation program. "This is Science Officer Zektar of the exploration vessel Morning Light," he said. "I am returning from an emergency situation with the assistance of a human rescue ship." There was a long pause before the controller responded. "Did you say human ship?" "Please confirm." "Confirmed," Zektar replied. "The human vessel New Horizon responded to my distress and provided life-saving assistance." Another pause. Longer this time. Zektar could imagine the confusion at the traffic control center. Velnari rarely interacted with other species and never as equals. "You are cleared for docking at Bay 7, the controller finally said. "Please report to station administration immediately upon arrival." Jake was studying the massive station through the viewport. "Beautiful place," he commented. "Your people are amazing builders." "Yes," Zektar agreed. "But I have learned that building beautiful things is not the same as building important things." Lisa was running final checks on the jury-rigged engine system that had brought them safely to the station. "These repairs should hold long enough for your people to do proper work," she reported. "But I'd recommend getting them fixed as soon as possible." "I will," Zektar promised. "And Lisa, thank you. You saved my life with your skills." "Just doing my job," Lisa replied. But Zektar could see that she was pleased by his gratitude. Tony had prepared a datapad with information about Velnari physiology and medical needs that he had learned during their journey together. "Give this to your doctors," he said. "It might help them understand how to treat humans if we ever meet again in medical emergency." Zektar took the pad carefully. "You think we will meet again?" "Maybe," Tony said with a smile. "Space is big, but it's also full of surprises." The docking process was handled by station computers since the human ship's systems were not compatible with Velnari technology. But Jake managed the approach with skill that impressed even the station operators, sliding the New Horizon into position with gentle precision. As they prepared to separate their ships, Zektar felt a weight of sadness he hadn't expected. These humans had become more than his rescuers. They had become something he didn't have a word for in his own language, but that humans called friends. "I wish I could invite you aboard the station," he said. "But my people, they would not understand." "We understand," Jake assured him. "Different cultures have different rules. We respect that." Zektar gathered his personal belongings and the data recordings from his original mission. As he prepared to cross back to his own ship for the final time, he turned to address all three humans. "You have shown me that intelligence and wisdom are not the same thing," he said carefully. "My people have great intelligence, but you have shown me wisdom that we lack. I will not forget this lesson." "Take care of yourself, Zektar," Jake said. "And if you're ever in human space, look us up. You're always welcome aboard the New Horizon." The airlock sealed and Zektar watched through his small viewport as the human ship slowly pulled away from the station. He felt alone in a way he had never experienced before, even during his days of drifting in dead space. Station administration was waiting for him when he finally docked his damaged ship. Commander Velteron, the station director, was an older Velnari with the kind of perfect bearing and flawless appearance that marked him as very important in their society. "Science Officer Zektar," Veltaran said formally. "We received your emergency transmission. We are pleased that you survived your mishap." "Thank you, Commander," Zektar replied. "I must file a full report on my mission and the circumstances of my rescue." "Yes, of course. But first, tell me about these humans. Why did they involve themselves in your situation?" Zektar chose his words carefully. "They detected my distress signal and came to assist." Without their help, I would have died. How unfortunate that you had to depend on such primitive beings, Veltaran said dismissively. Still, even crude technology can sometimes be useful. We will send them suitable compensation for their services. Commander, Zektar said, I don't think you understand. They didn't help me for compensation. They risked their own safety and resources simply because I needed help. Veltaran looked puzzled. That makes no sense. What did they expect to gain? Nothing, Zektar replied. They helped because they believed it was the right thing to do. This clearly made no sense to Veltaran, who dismissed the topic with a gesture. Primitive emotional behavior, he said. Fortunately, you are safe now, and can return to proper civilization. Over the following days, as Velnari technicians repaired his ship, Zektar wrote his official report. But alongside the technical details of his mission and accident, he found himself writing something more important. He wrote about human ingenuity, about their willingness to help strangers, about their different approach to solving problems. Most importantly, he wrote a formal recommendation to the Velnari High Council. He recommended that humanity be reclassified from primitive species to potential allies. He described their technological capabilities, their adaptability, and their moral character in terms that his people would understand. These beings possess qualities that our society would benefit from understanding, he wrote. Their approach to cooperation, problem-solving, and mutual assistance represents a form of advancement that we have not previously recognized. I formally request that the Council consider establishing diplomatic contact with the human government. When he submitted his report, Zektar knew that it would likely be ignored or dismissed. The Velnari had spent centuries believing in their own superiority, and one explorer's opinions were unlikely to change that overnight. But he had to try. 3 weeks later, as his repaired ship prepared to leave the station, Zektar received an unexpected message. It was from Jake Parker, transmitted through human communication networks to the Velnari diplomatic frequency. Hey Zektar, Jake's voice said through the translation system. Hope you're doing well and that your ship is fixed up proper. We wanted you to know that we delivered our cargo on time despite the detour, so don't worry about that. Lisa says hello, and Tony wanted me to tell you that he's written up some notes about cross-species medical care that might be useful if your people ever want to share information. Take care of yourself, friend. The galaxy's a better place with good people like you in it. Zektar sat quietly for a long time after the message ended. Then he began composing a new report, this one to be sent directly to the highest levels of Velnari government. If his people would not listen to arguments about human capabilities, perhaps they would listen to evidence of human character. He attached Jake's message to his report, along with detailed logs of everything the humans had done to save him. He wrote about their generosity, their ingenuity, and their friendship. Most importantly, he wrote about what he had learned about the true meaning of advanced civilization. A truly advanced species, he concluded, is not measured by the sophistication of their technology, but by their willingness to use that technology in service of others. By this measure, humanity may be more advanced than we are. As his ship departed Velnari Station 7 and headed home, Zektar made a private decision. Whatever the High Council decided about humanity, he would find ways to maintain contact with his human friends. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of opportunities for those wise enough to recognize them. Behind him, the station's lights grew dim and distant. Ahead lay Velnari space and a future that might be very different from the past, if enough people were willing to learn from the wisdom of their supposed inferiors. Zektar smiled, an expression he had learned from humans, and began planning his next mission. This time he hoped it might involve working alongside his new friends rather than simply observing from a distance. The universe, he had discovered, was much more interesting when you had friends to share it with.